Sure. Hi, my name is John Campbell. I am technical director at Triangular Pixels. We are a small indie studio founded about 6 or so years ago, basically to work on VR content. I used to work at Sony London Studio, doing things like Sigstar and Book of Spells, which was an AR game. I also ended up working on the really early days of what was called then Project Morpheus, which became PSVR. And the last thing I did before setting up our own thing was working on VR Worlds. And then as Triangular Pixels, we did Smash It Plunder, which was a social co-op versus game for PSVR. And then Unseen Diplomacy, which is kind of why I'm here, which was all about natural locomotion using basically tricks and portals to mean you're always physically moving yourself and no teleporting, no artificial locomotion.
Awesome. Robert, so I think, some of us are familiar with your app. Some of us have even played it. And your app features a really unique locomotion mechanic. Do you kind of want to give us a refresher on how that works?
Yeah, sure. So let me quickly guide you through. So my app is called Traversal. It's on the SideQuest store, and it allows you to utilize the space that you have in your living room or wherever to fully utilize it and to get the most out of a world. And what it does is it will create a procedurally generated world which uses impossible spaces to connect multiple different pieces. So let's, for example, say you have a labyrinth, and that's always a good example. You go like in a circle in the labyrinth, and once you're back on the original spot, you actually enter a different area, but your head thinks you're still in one big environment, which is coherent, and you never teleport, you never use the joysticks on your hand, but you actually walk through your living room and the world around you changes without you noticing. And this is the big trick that happens, and it makes it appear as if you're really fully immersed in a virtual world, and you walk around. And in my game, you have different settings. So one is, for example, a pyramid setting, something where you could maybe never be. You explore a tomb with a small torchlight, and you evade some traps, and you go there. Or you have a shooter where you actually really walk, or you run through a hostile environment, you shoot at enemies, and you really feel like a special agent because you actually walk through the labyrinth and through those areas. And that's what the game is all about. And there are multiple of those worlds. So this is a bit of the specialty of what I created. There's a small editor attached, and you can create your own worlds where you can then upload them to the game, and others can play them. And you have this. So I tried to make it more accessible to have those impossible spaces worlds, which is a bit hard to get to technically initially. And I just wanted to have it more focus on the creative parts, and then others can contribute and play.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure everyone gets it, but just to give kind of a visual demonstration, like if you were like a column in the room and I'm here and then I walk around you, now I'm in a new world, and then I do it again and now I'm in a third world. And the only way to go back to the first two is to walk back around the other direction. And so you can take these huge worlds and you condense them into a very small amount of physical space. It's a really cool mechanic. And I guess my first question is where did you first get the inspiration to pursue this mechanic as something that's kind of the center of a game?
Yeah, that's a good story. I think when you buy one of those VR glasses, you go through the setup process, and when you go through the setup, it tells you, hey, clean up your living room and remove everything, and then you start your first game, and in like 80% of the games I played, I stood in one space in the middle of my empty living room, and I was like, okay, and that's the room scale experience now. Sometimes I have to move one leg to the left, one leg to the right to go somewhere, and that's basically what VR locomotion amounts to in many games. And I said, isn't there maybe a different approach to utilizing that? And I was brainstorming, and then I did a small prototype, and then I said, maybe let's do a search on the internet of maybe there are games already like that. And then the first thing I found is what this nice gentleman here did, what John did, Unseen Diplomacy.
Mhm.
And it's amazing. And it's really one of those moments, like, I think you can maybe compare it to, like, if when you think of shooters, you think of Doom or something. And if I think of Impossible Spaces, then Unseen Diplomacy is always one of those things that immediately pops up. And the other one is, of course, the amazing creation by Void Room, or by Jarek, who's hopefully coming later. And it's really nice to have this panel here and meet the guys behind those games. So I started in August 2 years ago, and then gradually built on the technology, tested a bit different approaches. And I think, interestingly enough, it's quite a technical challenge to get right. And you have VR, and VR needs a lot of computational power, and you have to really think how to get these worlds to perform, and all the rules change. So you cannot, so for example, you throw something through a portal or through in an impossible world, it must not collide in a way that it collides in a typical game. So you have to actually redo physics, you have to redo lighting, you have to redo enemies that walk around in rooms, and all those things. So it's an amazing thing to be in.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And John, I apologize, I didn't have a chance this morning to play your game, but does it feature the same kind of non-Euclidean geometry scheme as Impossible Spaces does?
Yes, it is. That was where the concept we started from. So the history of that was that we were invited by Chet, when he was back at Valve, to a Vive jam before the Vive was released. And there's a bunch of teams, about 4 or 5 teams of us in a place in London. And like the goal for the jam was to use the Vive. And at the time, the Vive was you've got this big 4x3 track space. And in a similar way to what you're saying, Robert, lots of people's prototypes would just stand on one spot. Or at the most they were doing was the Jobstone thing, where it's mapped to your space. So you've got, a single room to move around. So at least you're moving side to side, but that was as far as it went. So at that jam, we had a jam game we called the Handgarden Heist, reference to the big jewelry heist that happened in London literally a few months before then. And it was that same core concept. Can we get away with no artificial locomotion, but still make you feel like you'd gone on a journey? The first, that one was tiny, and it was effectively a bunch of hard-coded box rooms, kind of half connected to each other. And then from that, sometime later, Unseen Diplomacy came out because it was we got a chance to do an installation game for Game City, which is a thing that happens in Nottingham. Well, it used to be every year. Not sure how that is these days. And it's a celebration of games. We had an installation game. And the thing was what could you do that you would never do for a commercial game, which is have a game that requires 4 meters by 3 meters. Because you can't release that on Steam. Nobody would nobody's got that space to actually be viable as a game. So it was the same. That was where that concept kind of got iterated on. Unseen Diplomacy was very simple. We took that space, we carved it up into quarters, and you always move in a sequence of rooms. So you always had a quarter room into another quarter room, and then you went into a half room that was long, half of the space. Then you could go into an L room, which was 3 quarters together. That would turn you around, and then on there you get a single, another, and then another double, and a double, and then the whole sequence can repeat. So that was quite nice in that we only really had 3 sizes of room. We had quarters, singles as it were, doubles, which was half the space, and these L-shaped. But the problem with that, and that was consistent, and we could do it. But then the problem with that is you needed that 4x3. So that's the big thing we're trying to change with Unseen Diplomacy 2, which is what we're working on now, is how do we maintain that no artificial locomotion style of gameplay, but let it scale to different places, let it match the space that you've got, which means going all the way down to, I think Oculus's minimum is 2 meters and the Vive Cosmos is 2 meters, and like in general people yeah, so there's a lot of different kind of things to work on to make it fit different people's spaces. So that's the technical challenge, and we haven't quite got that nailed yet, but that's what we're working on.
Yeah, that's
maybe to jump in here. That's
go ahead.
Because play size is a typical thing that many people are always coming up with. So I think even in times that housing becomes more expensive, we kind of in a bad environment that people have smaller flats to live in. But so when I released the first version of Traversal, it needed at least 2 meters, because what is done is the world is cut into tiles, into evenly spaced tiles, and I needed 4 tiles. Otherwise, it cannot work. And with the new version that came out in October, I got it down to 3 tiles. So all worlds cannot be built with 3 tiles, which means the minimum size which you need is now only 1.5 meters, which is something that many people have. So if you move away a chair or something and you set the Guardian to low sensitivity, you can actually now play an Impossible Spaces game, which is amazing, in your small living room, and you suddenly feel like you're in a huge environment where you can constantly walk around.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I have a question about that. And you mentioned some of the, in the rendering pipeline of the engine, whether it's Unity or whatever you're using, like, the engine designers are making certain assumptions, right? And when you introduce this non-traditional geometry, you're probably violating some of those assumptions. And, like you said, that's requiring you to do all kinds of extra technical work around lighting and occlusion and all these things. And Robert, I know that you have a level editor in your app so that the community can come in and use some of this technical infrastructure to, create their own spaces. Do you guys imagine a world where that goes even a step further, and lots of different apps are using this mechanic inside their app using some kind of shared technology?
Good question. We had, maybe to take a step back first before I get to the question, we had an interesting discussion going on in our Discord where somebody proposed, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have some sort of crossover story between Unseen Diplomacy, Traversal, T4God, and you kind of move between those worlds in some way, and you get maybe achievements for going through all of them, or you have a common story and you kind of experience the different environments. So this is like a first thing to connect apps together, and I think we should talk about that, John. I like the idea, and it's also good for cross-marketing if the guys from the Impossible Spaces worlds kind of keep together and push the genre a bit to make people aware that this exists, that there is a way of an alternative locomotion technique, which is not utilized a lot, but which is really amazing once you do it. And what I'm trying to do with the level editor is really setting up a platform which maybe allows you to do something like this, but it's kind of an insane project, I have to say, because you're not. So sometimes people ask me, hey, can't you just put the Portal stuff up on the asset store? And then you always get to the argument, no, it's not a Portal. I mean, you can do a Portal in one day. It's not a shader trick. It's an environment which is heavily optimized to create a physics, lighting, interaction-based game for you. And everything needs to evolve or revolve around this mechanic. So the mechanic is the driving force, and you cannot simply say, this is a Portal, I just use it. That will not work, and you will run into all these problems, and especially if you have Quest, and with Quest 2 it became much better, but with Quest you have so many performance bottlenecks which you have to take care of, and the number of optimizations which are done and so on. It's insane sometimes. And
Wow.
I had multiple moments where I just wanted to quit and say, okay, I just stopped this project. It doesn't make sense. And then luckily the next day I was waking up and I had some insight and just continued.
Great.
It's
John, is there anything you want to add there? Yeah.
I think Robin's got a good point there. It's a similar thing where people say, can't you just share the portal tech? It's like, it's not a shader trick. There's like a bunch of shader trickery going on, but there is so much more going on. And there's the comparison to people were talking about the Nemesis system for from the Shadow of Mordor game, and how there hadn't really been any follow-up to that, and that Nemesis system had kind of would been a tech dead end. And I think it's a similar thing. It requires so much buy-in, so much investment from every single part of the game, not just on an engine level, like you say, AI, pathfinding, all your physics, all of your lighting, all of your shadows, but from the game design has to very much support it. And you lose a lot of freedom, like the freedom if just having like a traditional like teleport or artificial locomotion fits with our current pipelines. Like people can make a level in a modeling tool or in Unity and you just make it, and there's no restrictions. You don't have to keep telling your level designers like, no, you can't put that there because the player can't get it there. Like, no, you have to keep everything on a flat plane, or you need to only change by this much, or there's so many restrictions. You need complete buy-in, and that's a big barrier and a big turnoff, because there's a lot more work to produce something that, at the end of the day, doesn't necessarily look like you've put in a lot more effort.
Yes, I fully agree. So when you design a level in Traversal, you start with a tile editor, and it solves two issues at once. So you have the play space, which is different for each user. So you need to have some mechanism of scaling. So you quickly get into the question of how to define anchors between elements, how to automatically repeat elements, and so on. And it's not an easy concept to start with. So I mean, if you're in Rec Room, you put some walls and that's it, and you walk around in the room. It's not an editor like that. It's really it's more like Houdini in the end. So you have a parametric system, but once you get the logic, it's so beautiful, because you create a world descriptively, and it's always consistent, and no matter how big the play space is, and you can place the elements, and then in the new version, what I did is now you don't manually connect those zones anymore. You simply say, this is a possible entry, this is a possible entry, here's a possible exit, and then you throw this all to the game, to the system, and it will shuffle around all the zones, and each playthrough is then different. And you can say, hey, this room should appear 2 times, this room 3 times, and then it really creates a unique playthrough each time you play. And this is really cool. And it would be really hard to do this manually, to rotate the rooms in the correct order, to offset them correctly. And if you have something, so there are more locomotion techniques than just walking, of course. So what I experimented with was to have moving platforms, for example. So you step onto a platform and it moves you somewhere to create a bit more of a distance between objects, that it's not so claustrophobic all the time, that you can maybe travel in a train, or you have a mine cart or whatever. And another thing would be climbing. But now the engine needs to know where you stand. It needs to offset the room while you're on the platform, and you need to end up on the exact same space in your living room again. Otherwise, the locomotion will not work. And these are so interesting challenges. It's really nice, and the engine solves it now automatically for the content creator. You simply say, "Hey, move this platform over there," and then everything works. But doing this manually is really painful.
Yeah, I'll just ask 2 more questions, because I think we'd enjoy kind of breaking out and having a casual chat about this. But the first one is, it's impossible to avoid fitness. These days as a UK, it's like a lot of the press I see is about fitness apps, a lot of the, featured stuff on SideQuest. And I could actually see Michael this mechanic. He's probably watching. He's usually here. But hey, Michael, if you're watching. But I guess you can address this answer to Michael then. would you see this as being a valuable mechanic for a fitness app? Like I'm imagining, doing lunges in a square around your room or something like that, where you'd really, I think, appreciate having this linear progression of your environment.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because one of our kind of core pillars that we took from Unreal Unseen Diplomacy 1 for the sequel is it's a physical assault course. That's one of our core pillars, that it's fun to be physically moving your body, to be dodging lasers, to be crawling through vents, to do that kind of thing. And like, some people would say, like, well, when I'm playing a game, I don't want to sit down. I want to sit down, and that's fine. They've got lots of games for them, but for us, it's about getting you moving. The joy of movement, of bending over in a slightly awkward way to kind of try and grab that object to get past the thing, and anything that gets people moving in a way that engages them. Like, I don't like the term like gamification, but it kind of is that. It gets them engaged in a way that maybe they wouldn't be doing otherwise, or just because I get bored in doing exercising. Like, I can't go to a gym and just run on a treadmill for 10 minutes. I'm bored in two. Like, I need something to engage my brain while I'm actually physically doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's a great cue, and maybe I can continue from here. I see two aspects. One is we have one person in our Discord who is really a super enthusiastic walker. So he's I think has a back issue or something, and for him this really helps to stay healthy, to walk around in an environment, and to actually just walk through our games and experience them. And especially when they are randomly created, this is always something new to look at. And one of my worlds, which I have, is a virtual gallery, which pulls images from the internet, which are always new. So it creates like an image gallery, or you can upload your own images, do photos in there or something like that. And this is really cool to have this personal content, and he walks. So this is one aspect of the exercising. But the other one is I saw two interesting posts. The one is I played Half-Life Alyx just 2 weeks ago, and they have this new option now with the commentary. So you have these bubbles, and they explain how they created the game and so on, which is really cool to start over again. And in one scene, they explain how their thought process. So they have this sewer tunnel, and they explain in their first version, it was a sequence where you have to crawl. So you have to go down on your knees, and they said most of the players hated that because they simply didn't want to crawl in an experience. And I think for our games, this means we have to really cater for different audiences. So I also love that aspect of having a lower ceiling, maybe not too long, but you really have to walk through a different passage, but there should always be a way to disable such elements, I think, to not have the world mandatorily use those. And but this is really nice to have this physical experience. And the other thing I saw was, I think I'm talking too much, but no, the other thing I saw was there's this jogging game, which I saw, which I think has this mechanic of projecting a video while you're running, which is ingenious, I think. So it's similar to, like you need some sort of treadmill, and I think the games that we have actually eliminate the treadmill, so you can actually walk. And if we get it done in an intelligent way, that could be a very interesting thing. But it's very circlish, so I think you get dizzy quite quickly when you actually go faster than walking.
Sure. Cool. That's a great answer. And the last question I'll ask before we kind of break out here is just, what's the best way to stay up to date with what you guys are doing?
So I do have a website, which is called traversal.com. And I think the best way is to be in the Discord channel, which is linked on the SideQuest. Simply go there, and we have a great community. If you come in on Fridays, there's a lot of off-topic funny pictures being posted, so I can always recommend that. And that's always the place to stay in touch.
Awesome.
I'm preparing an App Lab release right now, just to maybe mention that, because that's asked very often, and maybe a question that comes up. So we're actually planning now, or I'm actually planning to have the release in 1 month. And why in 1 month? Because we said, okay, App Lab is now the chance to actually also put a price tag on the game. And
Sure.
I think it's a reasonable thing after 2 years. And
what's the price tag going to be?
It's going to be either $8.99 or $9.99. So it's one of those reasonable price tags, not an Oculus store price tag where you always say like, "Whoa, what's going on?" And and
awesome.
We are using now this month to really polish and add new content, and but then simply also continue the journey from there. So join the Discord.
That's fantastic.
It'd be great to see some of you there.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, watching you evolve over the last 6 months. So congratulations on your progress, and we look forward to seeing you on the App Lab for sure.
Thank you.
What about you, John?
So we have a blog for the game at unseendiplomacy2.com. So I'm infrequently and hoping to increase the frequency of the blog posts as we actually get stuff we could show, because I'm always very nervous about showing them certain unfinished features because I don't want to make promises about things not in the game. So we have a blog there. I have a whole series of blogs there on the actual nitty-gritty of Portal rendering, which if you're interested in that is kind of goes reasonably deep and has got lots of references for things.
Awesome.
And we also have our own Discord. So the Discord is linked off their website. We have the kind of the chatty area, and then if you're using any of our asset tools, we have like the tech support for that. So it's a nice extra communication channel. So yeah, you're welcome to all join.